What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki coming at you with another video. My Hero Academia chapter 350 review. So if you haven't read it yet, you gotta go. I'm gonna dive right into that page by page breakdown like we do every time. So opening up immediately, we're cutting away to the prison or a jail station. And we get the return of the gorilla, of course, who was with Genzo during the Coach Festival. But in addition to that, we cycle in and bring out the Ujiko, or Kyudai Garaki, however you want to refer to him, the doctor. And he's kind of monologuing and talking to the security guard about the materials and the way that they used to farm people, and just kind of in general. It's not out of the wheelhouse for the doctor, because every time he's been confronted with authority, or we've seen him in a position where, since he's been captured or caught for being the criminal that he is, he's kind of just been like, yeah, blah, 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 brag, flex, whatever, you know, here's why we'll win. You know, he was laughing and celebrating even while being in, threat range of the death by decay. When Shigaraki awakened, he was celebrating when he found out Makia was on his way. Ujiko has kind of been mouthy the whole time about the quality of the villains or how they'll win, etc., since he's been uncovered, so to speak. So, and we're kind of picking up where we left off with the Shoto and the Dabi thing, with him starting to lift up and be over the statue, and then we start the flashback where Dabi, mentions going 11 years back to when he was burning on Sakoto Peak, and what we get is what, based on the context of the story, is definitely supposed to be All for One, with him wearing a similar bowler hat to the guy that we saw depicted in Shigaraki's backstory during My Villain Academia. So this would suggest that All for One is the one who brought Shigaraki home. Whether or not that would mean that he gave him the quirk Decay or not, though, is kind of a different discussion. One of my big issues with that still would be that if he could just give Shigaraki a quirk like Decay, and that would be enough to do it, and it didn't really have to be Shigaraki, and that makes Shigaraki not really special outside of his connections to Nana as far as that. And it doesn't seem to be the case with the way that they've talked about Shigaraki, and even the way they talk about Dabi in this chapter, them being somewhat different or having those drives that set them apart from other characters or other people within the universe as well. So and so Doctor refers to him as a boy that was born with everything, and this is one to mirror Shoto's chapters in his introduction being the boy born with everything, kind of as a reference to him supposedly being the perfect experiment when you think about it. So he's the one who has everything. He has his father's affection, he has his father's affection and attention. As far as the other siblings are concerned, he's got the quirks that his father considered to be ideal. He does have a better quirk than what Dabi would be considered to have. Even with Dabi's attack power being so high, it does come at a higher cost than what Shoto is dealing with. So, Shoto being the boy born with everything to be the perfect villain or a perfect hero, because if you think about it, he's got a hero dad, lots of money, all of it, born with everything to be a hero. And in this case, Dabi is the boy born with everything, but everything to make him a villain, a background that rejects the idea of him being a hero, with a quirk that causes lots of destruction, and this volatility being attached to emotional instability and its firepower increasing based upon that. So we see that when Dabi wakes up, though, after the Sakoto Peak incident, he's in a giant facility, lots of children, people excited to see him wake up finally. We get confirmation that he was unconscious in a coma for 3 years between the Sakoto Peak incident and his first moment. So at about age 16, Dabi was mentally only about 13. So this kind of makes the 3-4 year age gap between Dabi and characters like Shigaraki a lot more negligible, because mentally there's not actually that much time conscious and active separating them two. So he really is basically the same age as Spinner and Shigaraki for all intents and purposes in that wheelhouse. Now we get this really creepy sunflower buff dude as the doctor, and I think it's easy to see his sunflower face guy, like, oh, friendly guy, doctor, and that's what the kids are focused on. But when you see how built he is, you can kind of tell that he's partially there for straight up manhandling the kids if necessary based on his build. It's just kind of obvious. And we see that when Dabi woke up back then, his first thought was, and then his thoughts were, to go back to his family, to apologize, to try to do better, to not necessarily be this bad guy that we see today, or the guy we see today. He wanted to, and he figured that his dad was too busy. Of course, he doesn't know the severity of the damage he's been through, or that this, like, what kind of hospital this specifically is. And since this one tied to Ujiko, of course, this is one that they didn't inform them. So obviously, unfortunately for Dabi, he is unaware of this information when he sees this. So when he does, as we get later on in the chapter, he gets explained to him that his body's never going to recover. He's never going to get the fire that he's supposed to. And that they ultimately failed to save him. He's immediately brought back to these thoughts of himself as a failure, potentially to Endeavor. Specifically, the flashback that you see being brought up is back when he first started having white in his hair, and his dad started asking him about it because he was worried about him dyeing his hair or something like that. So, and when they focus on bringing his fire back, that's when Dabi's really done. And what it's important to note is that Dabi mentions that he hadn't cried since his tear ducts burned, but it was not the Sokoto Peak incident that burned his tear ducts, as you can actually see a visible tear on page 9. So we see that when he woke up, he was able to cry. They did somewhat manage to fix him, and it's noted that he's a bunch of graphs. Now, it's important to note that Dabi has been stated to be kind of a reference to the novel of Frankenstein, and, you know, Dr. Frankenstein's monster, commonly just called Frankenstein over time. And so him being kind of like a patchwork of pieces put together, and we've always kind of seen, you know, that's what he's looked like, but no, this is the hard confirmation that it's been extra graphs that were attached to him and sat there over like 3 years healing or whatever. So Ujiko acknowledges that they could not like control or shape Dabi, and that he eventually left. And it's worth noting that he seems to have burned down one of their facilities. So when he comes back, Dabi actually confronts Ujiko about being the one who kept him alive during MBA, and we see that conversation, it was genuinely touch and go, and that Ujiko realized he could die there. But what's more is that it didn't make sense back then, at least, for the way Ujiko was so closed off with everybody, and then was like, oh, but Dabi, I have the perfect project for you, and created an excuse to get closer to him. And we had all been wondering for a long time how he survived. Before we got the backstory of the Himuras, back in some of the old content, we definitely talked about this, and how if Dabi was saved by them, it would make sense because he would be the one most fitting or qualified to save him from such a heavy injury, especially with all the body science and modifications that he can do. So we're keeping, which even with that, that doesn't mean that we're not going to find out that the Himuras are involved, only because this explained what Dabi was doing at age 16, and we're still missing about 8 years of context for what Dabi's life should have been, or what his day-to-day would have been. And it doesn't seem like, if you remember back when he was introduced, that he was out here doing a lot of heinous villainy for those 8 years. So there's still some question marks up in the air about what Dabi's life was. Of course, it could just be that he was a homeless dude that got jobs where he could and trained a lot with his quirk in the woods or something like that. So and it's worth noting that Dabi mentions how he could have been turned into a Nobu, and that during My Villain Academia, specifically Ujiko, where we got that first allusion to them potentially having a connection, suggested or was positing the idea of turning Shigaraki into a Nobu. Also worth noting that the doctor did say he himself might have met these people before without them remembering, and that was likely him throwing out a fishing a line for Dabi, so to speak, to kind of latch onto and figure out that he was the one who saved him, and put it all together, especially once they went down to the, you know, preschool looking area that Hood was stored in, and we got to see some of the more Nomu. And what's more, what I want to kind of talk about is how Dabi and Shigaraki are both canonically now experiments to some degree of Ujiko and All for One, with both of them being characters who exceeded the expectations of what the results would be, with Dabi's with Shigaraki having far more of his consciousness and the ability to fight back way more than they seem to have expected, and the compatibility of quirks, and then with Dabi having this ability and willingness to survive 11 years past the incident, and technically 8 years after when he was projected to die, since they had expected him to die a month later after he woke up. So both of them going beyond kind of existing in a state of plus ultra now, so to speak. So if you think about it, when Shigaraki transformed, he was introduced as plus ultra Shigaraki, and we see now that Dabi has existed as a plus ultra form of himself this entire time. And when he goes back home as Toya. He still wants to return to his family, and he sees Endeavor still abusing Shoto, and his takeaway is that nothing has changed and that his death has meant nothing, so to speak, because he even sees the altar to himself. And the way I kind of interpret this is that it's insane how stubborn Endeavor really was, because when you think about it, what he says himself is that he was trying to figure out a way to make Toya's death worth it, and so that caused him to double down. Which means, and it's directly a byproduct of losing Toya, that he went even more insane and just decided he had to commit to it because he had lost his first son off the stream. So he has to make it justified, which means that Toya's death is monumentally impactful to the way that Endeavor approaches the world and sees things. But because it's the action of doubling down as a trauma response to the horrific event, Toya sees it as them not valuing that death, not valuing the end of his life, and not valuing that sacrifice. And that leads to him pulling away and thinking, this is the total time that I have to reject Toya. I have to reject the Todoroki family and these hero ideologies. And we get this idea that what Dabi is seen as within the world of villains is that one will that never would truly submit to All For One in a way. And that kind of also explains why All For One was so like condescending towards him, and was comfortable calling him Toya, because even if Dabi was doing things around the world and he was seeing Dabi in action, he met him as Toya first. So to him, it's just like, okay, cool, that scamp that I wanted to manipulate and tune and train as a villain left and still came back to ultimately work within my villain organization, help me achieve my plans, etc. So it all worked out for me. It's all for my benefit. So cool. Welcome back, Toya. You don't have friends. That's why you had to come back here to me and my friends and still rely on my network. It's all mine anyway. And I think that's that distinction and that's something that I kind of hope to see highlighted throughout this as we get this battle between Shoto and Dabi. Is Shoto or Dabi really kind of pondering his relationship with Lee, the difference between his dynamic with how it is with All For One versus Endeavor versus Shigaraki and the people in his group, as well as his feelings towards Twice, finally making these things come to a head. And I kind of expect that when we do get a Twice discussion, we will be going amongst all three locations, getting Shigaraki's perspective as well as Dabi's and Toga's across maybe 2 chapters to really bring it all together, and then have that transfer where it's whatever the next plot or phase of the battle that would lead to. So, because it's, seeing that harm to people he cared about that made Toya really become Dabi. And it's that harm that was coming to Twice that really got Dabi, and that harm that did come to Twice that got Dabi's flames at their hottest during the Paranormal Liberation War, during the Villa stage, and then it was being interacting with that family. So even if he physically doesn't feel things anymore, even if he keeps saying he's numb, the heat that he releases, the intensity of these flames, and us knowing that as a child, the highest amount of flames would happen when he was emotionally worked up, and he would end up crying from just how emotionally excited he was. It's very clear that he still feels inside, and that's what's allowing him to keep going, keep pushing beyond. And like somebody mentioned in the chat for the Church of MHA, that's what allows him and Shigaraki to come beyond death, was this ability to hate and be angry and move beyond it. So yeah. Let me know what you guys thought of this chapter. I enjoyed it wonderfully. I'm gonna go ahead and pop over to Anime Lately, though this will probably be edited and released after you see that stream if you go and watch it, but make sure you do. This actually set up one last thing that I will go back and edit into another video that I have recorded that is actually partially about Dabi. So I hope that you guys will be around for that video too, because it is going to be a doozy, and this chapter really kind of reaffirms everything that I was saying in that video, and I recorded that about 2 weeks ago. So I'm really excited. Hope to see you guys around again. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Comment, interact with the piece. I'm Aniki. Hope to see you guys for the next chapter and for more videos, and I am out.